Good evening all, and welcome. As someone who is about to have to deal with a few years worth of soiled diapers, hopefully only one, right? I thought I'd share the joy of poop with all of you. So get comfortable and let the brownness take control. This happened to a girl I knew called Betty. Betty had been dating this guy for a while. She thought this guy was super great. Well, one day after a few weeks of dating, the boyfriend invites Betty over to his house for dinner and to meet his parents. Dinner was going well, and Betty was getting along with the boyfriend's parents, when all of a sudden she felt the need to poop. She asked to be excused and to use the restroom. Then the family told her to use the first bathroom on the second floor. Betty went up to the bathroom and took a truly impressive dump, like something you've never seen before. She tried to flush the toilet, but the poop wasn't going down. It was clogged. Betty looked around for a plunger, but there was none to be found, so she started to panic. She really wanted this evening to go well, but didn't want to be caught as the one that stopped the crapper during dinner, as they would definitely know she would be the culprit. In an act of pure desperation, Betty began grabbing the crap out of the toilet with toilet paper to keep her hands from being covered in it. She took it and began throwing it out the window. In her mind, she thought she had to do anything necessary to erase the evidence. After successfully flinging all her stool out the window, she left the bathroom and went back down to dinner. She walked into the dining room to see that all of her boyfriend's family looked awestruck. She noticed that the youngest sibling of the boyfriend was looking up at the ceiling. It turned out the family had one of those sky windows on the ceiling, and it happened to be located directly below the window to the second floor bathroom. The poop she had just thrown out the window had plopped right onto the sky window. Out of spectacular levels of embarrassment, Betty just left the house and went home. My uncle was a long-haul trucker back in the 90s and mainly did international runs from Canada down to the US and back to Canada, with a pretty nice new Kenworth that had one of those maximum size sleepers on it. It had a built-in toilet and the works. He decided that the small tank that came with the toilet was a pain in the ass to have to empty so frequently, so he converted half of his passenger side diesel tank into a septic tank. A few weeks later, after converting his tank, he happened to pull into a truck stop somewhere in the States and parked for the night after driving longer than he should have. When he woke up at 5 a.m., with the dawn just starting to get bright, he climbed out to see beside his truck something that made him laugh every time he tells the story. On the ground, on the right side of his truck, was a 5-gallon jerry can, a siphon hose, with one end in his tank, and the other laying on the ground, puddle of puke and some puke footprints, and another few feet away, a puddle of puke. Another few feet away, another puddle of puke. Some dumbass tried to siphon his septic tank in the middle of the night. This poop story happened about 10 years ago when I was 25. My boyfriend at the time had met a sales goal at his work, which earned him a free trip to Mexico with his co-workers. I also got to tag along after paying my own way. Well, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the vacation constipation syndrome. Basically, you have trouble pooping when you're not home. Often when we're on vacation, we forget, or we're too busy, or simply feel uncomfortable pooping in a place which is unfamiliar. I wanted to avoid this terrible fate, so decided to take some of my herbal colon cleanse pills the night before we left. We had an early morning flight and, unfortunately, I did not receive nature's call before we left the apartment. I then assumed that the pills weren't working properly, and decided to speed things up with a caramel macchiato, hoping that the espresso would help get things flowing. I downed my coffee, and we boarded the plane. About halfway through the flight, I felt my stomach starting to percolate. I knew there was no way I could poop in an airplane bathroom. It's hard enough to pee in one of those. I sat there in my seat, clenching the armrest, as I felt my stomach become more and more agitated with every bout of turbulence that we hit. Finally, after feeling like I was going to crap my pants, I decided I should just suck it up and poop in the airplane bathroom. Yes, I know. I thought all about those poor people that were going to go into the bathroom after me. I made my way to the back of the airplane and mentally prepared myself for the bowel cleansing of a lifetime. I was very happy that the airplane was loud, and I could barely hear anything besides the roar of the engine. I figured the loudness of the aircraft would camouflage any colon evacuation sounds that may occur. I sat down and braced myself. To my amazement, nothing happened. I tried again and the same thing, nothing. I assumed I must have had stage fright or something. It felt like it was just held in with a plug. My aircraft crap was foiled, so I returned to my seat and tried to relax. By the time we landed, I was so grateful. It would only be a little longer before we got to our hotel room. But boy, was I wrong. Apparently, we had to rush to another gate to catch a smaller plane to our real destination. Another plane ride. This ride only took about an hour, and we finally reached our destination. At this point, I was ready to release the Kraken. We grabbed our bags and went to wait for our group coach bus. My stomach was beginning to bloat, and I could tell that I had some major gas building up. I casually walked away from the group to a large planter and prayed to God to watch over me as I tried to release some of the gas, praying I wouldn't shart. I stood there releasing pretty impressively long, silent but deadly farts. Slow and steady was the key. My boyfriend walked over and asked what I was doing. I looked at the planter full of tropical foliage and told him I was just admiring the plants. We then boarded the bus. Little did I know the ride on the bus would be another 45 minutes. Finally, we reached our all-inclusive resort and I hurried off the bus. We had a large group, and everyone was trying to check in at once. A lot of the people's rooms weren't ready yet, and I began to panic when I heard that. Some of the people would have to wait an hour and a half before their room was ready. There was no way I could make it until then. When our turn to check in came up, we walked to the desk and I stood there clenching my butt cheeks, holding my moistened cool towel and melon cooler that the hotel staff had greeted us with. My boyfriend opted to upgrade a room with an ocean view, which was fortunately immediately ready with the addition of the upgrade. I was almost there, I thought. A staff member led us down many hallways until we finally reached our room. It was a beautiful resort and had a lovely room, and I hurried in and rushed the staff member out. I ran to the restroom, slammed the door shut, and had my pants down in no time, and I began releasing the beast before my cheeks even hit the toilet. This turd had traveled all the way from Chicago to Mexico and was coming out with full force. It was a massive molten brown lava poop. I sighed with relief once everything was expelled and sat there with a smile on my face and a huge sense of relief. I admired the beautiful orange and white marble bathroom as I flushed the odorous evidence away. I exited the bathroom and proceeded to admire the rest of the room. My boyfriend, unfortunately, went to use the restroom immediately after I had, and as he walked in, all I heard was, "Oh dear God, what happened in here?" There was no way I was getting out of the blame. I explained to him that I had taken some herbal colon cleanser to get my vacation started off fresh. Well, not so fresh for him. Did I mention I broke up with him a few years later? I was tired of all his crap. Happy pooping, everyone. This happened about 45 years ago in a steel mill town in southwestern Pennsylvania, USA, near Pittsburgh. It was a stereotypical steel town with lots of families who were second-generation American, whose grandparents had immigrated from various countries in southern or eastern Europe. None of the mothers and fathers put up with any nonsense, and discipline was enforced with wooden spoons and belts. Most people had vegetable gardens and either hedges or rows of trees along their property line. The streets were dimly lit by street lights that were placed too far apart, generally only at street corners and intersections. Most of the neighborhood was dark at night. The roads themselves were crumbling stretches of asphalt or macadam, and there were plenty of potholes or throw cars' front ends out of alignment. Small patches of trees stood on lots that were too steep to build on, so there were places to hide and play out of sight of the roads. We were 4 friends about 14 to 15, and we usually had nothing to do and nowhere to do it, so we constantly looked for something to do. Well, one night we were all sitting on a storm sewer just out of the circle of light cast by the streetlight. We were talking about what we could do before it was time to go in for the night. Some stupid ideas came up, like taking someone's ladder and climbing up into the roof, or pounding on someone's metal garbage cans until they came running out of the house to see what was going on. At some point, one of us brought up the old paper bag trick. The paper bag trick was a cruel prank that we had all heard of but never actually knew to have been played. You were supposed to take a paper bag and poop in it. Then you took the bag and set it on someone's porch in sight of the door. You lit the paper bag on fire and knocked on the door and ran and hid. Then you watched as the homeowner came out and stomped on the fire and got poop all over his shoes. We all laughed about this, and that should have been the end of it. But one of the guys left for a short time, and when he came back, he had a paper bag in his hand. It looked like we were actually going to do it. But one slight problem held us up. No one had to poop. This seemed to be an insurmountable obstacle. But then one of us remembered that there was a family around the neighborhood who had a dog, and they were a little lazy about cleaning up their yard. Another short trip to pick up a garden trowel, and we were off to harvest some dog poop. We arrived at the yard, and soon enough, the bag was about a quarter filled with fresh and old dog turds. The guy holding the bag twisted the top once to keep the odor in the bag, and we were off. Now we had a new problem. Whose porch would we choose? Everyone knew everyone in the neighborhood, and a lot of people were related through blood or marriage. On top of that, all the fathers had physical labor jobs, most of them in the steel mill, and they were not adverse to kicking kids' asses. While we argued over whose porch to choose, we saw a car's headlights start to come down the road. This was the answer to our problem. We set the bag in the middle of the road and lit it. We got the bag and put it down just outside the ring of light cast by the streetlight. One of us lit a match and set it ablaze. Then we ran to the other end of the block to watch the fun. The car stopped. Someone got out as he stamped his feet to put the flame out, and we could hear him swear all the way to the end of the block. It was a cop. We ran into a small patch of wood nearby to hide, regroup, and decide our next move. I should have mentioned earlier that this was on a high school night, and we all had to be home before long. We could see the cop car still in the road as he attempted to clean his shoes. He got into the car and started driving very slowly down the street. At one point, one of the guy's mothers started calling for him. Luckily, the cop was in the car and didn't hear. The guy was able to sneak down a dark, unlit, unpaved alley, covered only with slag. The alley led to the back gate of his house. He made it home safely. The second guy followed the first down the alley and was able to avoid the cop, who was driving on a different street, and also made it back safely, which left 2 of us. We separated and each tried to make it home. I was sneaking through a neighbor's yard when I heard someone running full tilt towards me. With nowhere to hide, I dropped flat on the ground and hoped whoever it was would pass me in the dark. It was my friend, who hadn't been able to get home. He dropped down next to me and told me to look up towards my house. I did, and saw the cop was using his spotlight to illuminate our next-door neighbor's hedges. I couldn't go home. My friend took this opportunity to run home while the cop was up by my house. He arrived home safely too. Now it was just me outside. I was worried I wouldn't be able to get home before someone called for me, and then I'd be busted for sure. However, I reasoned that if the alley had been a safe passage for the other three, it should be for me too. I walked down the alley, cut through my friend's yard, and ran across the street. Now I was only one house away from home. Lucky for me, there was a row of crabapple trees along the property line. Under those trees it was pitch black every night, and I was able to sneak through the yard under the cover of crabapples and made it to my own yard. I had a habit of carrying my house keys with me at all times. Among those keys was the one for the cellar door. While the cop was busy in the front of the house, I was able to unlock the cellar door and get in safely. That's the story of the burning paper bag trick. Like I wrote in the beginning, this happened 45 years ago. It was a very stupid thing to do for a whole load of reasons, and I do not condone doing it under any circumstances. An old friend told me about this, and it's by far one of the most bizarre poop stories I've ever heard. Karen and I were walking around a large strip mall area one afternoon when she told me about how one day years ago, her and her friend Amanda were at Walmart. I swear the weirdest people and unexplainable situations always seem to happen at Walmart. They were making their way through the store when Karen spotted a large human turd on the ground. Just a random turd on the floor in the middle of Walmart. She explained that she stopped in her tracks confused and also wondered if she was hallucinating. How did someone manage to just drop a large piece of crap on the floor like that? She asked Amanda to confirm if what she saw was in fact a poop just there, and Amanda confirmed. They both kind of just stood there puzzled when an elderly man started walking towards it. Apparently he didn't see it, slipped, then fell back first into the brown. I have no idea how he was oblivious to it, and she said his entire back was covered in the poop when he got up. It looked like it had exploded all over his back. I literally burst into uncontrollable laughter and caused a public scene. I was practically convulsing in it when she told me this. Karen was laughing too, and we both admitted that we were both a little cruel for thinking it was so funny. I mean, poor old man, he may have broken a hip, and his back was covered in some stranger's feces. I do hope he's okay though. This next story happened when I was about 6 or 7. My mum invited me to go with her and one of her friends to a huge park that I hadn't been to before. On the way I was feeling super bloated and exhausted with that familiar gurgle sound your body makes when it's anticipating a code brown. The park was out of town, and there weren't any areas on the way. I figured that when I got to the place I'd be able to find a bathroom, but when we got there were nothing. I tried to hold it in, but it was getting to a point where I was getting sick from the pressure of needing to go. So I pulled my mum aside and explained I was about to blow. Her friend had a large older van, so my mum asked for the keys, opened the doors and stood in front of me for cover. I had to let loose on the side of the street. I don't know what the hell I actually ate, but I swear I ended up crapping 3 days worth of poop. I kid you not, I have never to this day, and I'm 30 now, have pooped this much in one sitting. I have no idea what hit me, but I was left with a pile almost as tall as my ankles. Even my mum was puzzled, wondering how a little girl could defecate this much in one go. Out of all the times in my life I had to poop this much, it had to be at a public park on the road, right? When I was barely finished, a little black poodle came up to us, and to our horror, it fancied the pile. I have never seen a dog in more glee than this in my life. It was pretty much swimming in my feces, rolling around with it and eating it. It just completely immersed itself in my crap. My mum was worried the owner would find us and we'd get in trouble, so she quickly got me in the van, called over her friend and had us leave. I was too tired to care about the owner of the dog or to even laugh at this point because I was so tired. I literally blacked out as soon as I got into the van. I was exhausted from pooping such an epic load, and to this day my mum still occasionally brings up the story to embarrass me and to also reflect upon. If that were my dog, I'd have to disown it. Can you imagine taking your dog to the park and returning it completely head to toe, covered in human waste? Most poop stories you've heard have probably been pretty funny, but I have one for you that is actually one of the most tragic experiences to date that's ever happened to me, and I'm still haunted by it. It happened about 5 years ago. I was moving from Colorado to Washington State. I didn't have many things. I'm quite the minimalist. Everything I owned was enough to go with me on a Greyhound bus. To those of you who are unfamiliar with Greyhound, let me start off by saying that it is the most ghetto transportation in the States. I wish I would have just taken a plane instead. But I was trying to save money, so I regrettably took Greyhound. It doesn't check your baggage, and it basically has zero standards of who you are to use it. As long as you have money and they don't catch you with drugs, they allow the scum of the earth to use their transportation. Well, I arrived at the station about 20 minutes before boarding because my ride was late. It's noteworthy to always be much earlier if you ever find yourself taking a Greyhound, or else you'll be picking your seat last and end up getting one of the worst like I did. I was the last to board, and the seat I ended up sitting in was broken and extremely uncomfortable. About an hour and a half on the road and the bus makes its first stop in Green River, Utah. Everyone gets out to stretch their legs, and I needed to use the restroom, and here's where the horror story begins. The restroom only had 2 stalls and several people making a queue so long that I was standing by the snack aisle. A couple of people started leaving the line with a look of sheer disgust on their face. Odd, I thought. Next thing I know, I can hear grunting coming from the restroom. Given how many people had left at this point, the line sped up considerably, and now I was in the restroom itself when I saw a woman with her pants around her ankles, bare ass in the sink, taking a heaping pile of crap that smelled so bad I thought I was going to cry. I couldn't believe it. I literally thought I was hallucinating from stress. Apparently this woman really needed to go because she had no problem crapping in the one and only sink in the restroom. Screw this, I thought, and held it in. I couldn't wash my hands anyway when I was done, and I couldn't bear the smell. I felt so bad for whoever had the job of cleaning that up. Frankly, I'd quit. Gas station pay is not enough to clean a sink full of human feces. I'd love to say that's where the story ends, but it's not. We all boarded back on the bus, and to my horror, I realized the lady who pooped in the sink was sitting in front of me. I hadn't taken notice before, but now I had recognized her, along with the smell that followed. Apparently she didn't wipe, as it stank in front of me. Might I add, this was during the summer, and nothing smells worse than hot poop. About 45 minutes after we all get back on the bus, I'm doing what I can to cover my nose from the smell. And that is when I hear this crazy freak of nature start grunting. Oh, God. Was she crapping right there on her seat? She was grunting a good 5 minutes or so, and at each minute, the smell intensified to unbearable levels. I actually began crying in my seat. The smell was so bad. On Greyhound, you really aren't allowed to get up and try and switch seats, or you get yelled at by the driver. And regardless, if you could, this bus was packed. I couldn't see anywhere else to sit. I don't know what this woman ate, but it was some of the worst smelling poop I'd ever had the displeasure of smelling. After what felt like 5 hours, but was probably just another hour, the bus stopped again for another bathroom break. I got off the bus and immediately pulled the bus driver aside to explain the situation, crying and begging for him to remove the woman from the bus. Clearly she wasn't stable, and soiling the bus made the entire back end of it unbearable. Now this goes to show how disregarding Greyhound employees are. Instead of removing this woman and cleaning the seat, he simply had me relocate and sit next to the most disrespectful excuse for a human being up front, where there was an open seat next to him. The guy I ended up sitting next to told me off the entire drive to the next boarding station, which was a good 2 hours, saying how he didn't want anyone next to him, calling me all sorts of names, and even yelled at the driver about me being there. The driver just ignored him, and I'll never take a Greyhound again. It's worth the extra money to take the plane. My second story involves my mum. She used to work at this centre that helped a lot of people with disabilities to learn independence and get jobs. When I was 4, she met John, a man who had cerebral palsy and other mental disabilities. I'm not aware of the specifics. He also had one leg that was significantly longer than the other and had to wear a special boot to compensate for walking. I grew up with John, and he quickly became a second grandpa to me. He legitimately looked like, sounded like, and even acted like Mermaid Man from SpongeBob. My mom would take him grocery shopping, and we'd take him out to dinner and watch movies often, and even invited him to our home on some occasions. When I was about 13, the following story took place. We were in the process of moving from the home we were at, and had just carpet shampooed everything. John had dinner with us that day, and we were about to get him to take him home when my brother called. My brother lives out of state and rarely calls, so my mom really wanted to take the call. John was sitting on this little shower chair he brought with him, as he found it easier to get on and up from than our other furniture. Thank God he had this chair, because it would have been so much worse if he was sitting on something else. John was sitting 5 or 6 feet away from the bathroom when he said to my mum that he needs to use it. My mum points to the bathroom right next to him and says, "Okay, it's right there," and goes back to the phone. I'm watching from the couch. John looks a bit frustrated and tells her again how he needs to use the bathroom, and my mum just pointed to where it was. This goes on for another 2 or 3 more times of him getting increasingly more frustrated, saying he needs to use it, and my mum telling him where it is, as well as saying to stop interrupting her on the phone. I get up and ask John if he needs help getting to the bathroom. He ignores me and gets real red in the face and says, in a devastating voice, that he's got to go. I ask a second time if he needs assistance, but he ignores me, goes silent and says, "Kay, I had an accident." All of a sudden I see brown liquid on his chair, and oh wow did it smell. My mum got off the phone and started yelling at John and exclaiming how the bathroom is right there. He ignores her and starts grunting loudly, and she shouts, "Are you pushing out more? John, I said I had the shampoo just carpeted." At this point I'm laughing so hard I can barely breathe. John is grunting, crapping his pants, and now he's crying because Mum's flipping out. She starts grabbing moving boxes to line the back seat of the car and ushers for John to get up so we can take him home. I'm trying to help him get up, but he wouldn't move. He was so determined to just sit there and continue crapping himself. My mum began crying, and honestly, I shouldn't have found it funny, but I ended up paralyzed and laughed to the point I couldn't help him get off his chair. I actually have tears recounting how hilarious this was. She managed to pull him up, and he agreed to walk to the car. Midway outside, he decides to stop and sit down on the concrete stairs and began crying as he crapped himself some more. My mum was crying and looked like she'd given up on life. John is as red as a tomato, sobbing and grunting while he keeps crapping himself, and my eyes are soaked with tears as I scream with laughter. My mum got so angry at me and kept telling me it wasn't funny, but I couldn't help it and instinctively yelled that it was. We managed to get John into the car. As we were driving him home, my mum is lecturing him. I'm still laughing hysterically, and not even a minute after he apologizes, he started grunting and crapping more in our back seat. My mum yells, "Are you still going?" I guess because I was laughing, John laughed a little and said he was sorry again, and then continued to sob and defecate. The smell was so bad we got him home, and as he got there his entire bum and upper legs were drenched in poop. The boxes didn't protect the amount of liquid that bled through and soiled the car seat. We couldn't get the smell out for 3 months or so, and he was banned from being in our car for quite a while. My mum felt bad for not letting him in our car for so long, as we were the only real friends he had that would give him rides and such. One night we made another mistake and asked if he wanted to go for a night ride. I had to go to Kmart to take something back, and he lived in the area, so we thought it would be a quick drive to get from, and believed he learnt his lesson. But sure enough, we were very wrong, and when we got to Kmart, we specifically told John that if he needed to use the bathroom, he needed to unlock the door and go in. We asked him to please never poop in our car again. He got flustered and said he wouldn't, and we stupidly believed him. We were in the store no longer than 5 minutes, when we resumed to a sobbing John. We thought someone had tried to break in or something, panicked as to why he was crying and asked what was wrong. "I'm sorry," he said. "I had another accident." This time, though, we waited to grunt some more until we took him home. As soon as he got out the car, he just stood there and began crapping himself. I will never know why. He'd rather soil himself than use the toilet. I'm a janitor, and I was cleaning a neighborhood's community party/pool house. It was a beautiful Friday afternoon, some of the warmest weather Ohio had seen in months. Spring on the horizon. I was enjoying this day at work, cleaning once a month, a job that I had had for a few years now. It was time to tend the bathroom, spraying down the women's, then going into the men's. Upon entering the men's room, there was an awful stench. A fair mass of poop had greeted me at the toilet. Someone took a dump and didn't flush. No problem, gross, but I'm used to it. I pulled down the lever to kiss it goodbye, thinking all was well, but it wasn't. Turd lumps and watery diarrhea rapidly flooded to the surface of the toilet rim, back for revenge from me trying to flush it away. My first thought was, oh crap, and I immediately went for the plunger, but there wasn't one. Panic deluged my mind, and I ran to find one. I checked the closet, no plunger, the women's bathroom, stall by stall. Each moment my heart beat faster. No plunger, no plunger, no, thank God, a plunger. But of course the stall was locked, so I couldn't use the door. There was only one way. I had to get on my hands and knees for this thing, but nothing could stop me from the sweet weapon of relief. Grabbing it, I sprinted back to the men's room, plunger at the ready. Brown murky water overflowed when I dunked it in. It was the most vile sight I've seen in my 4 years of janitorial work. I thought this toilet was a goner, and I'd never get it unclogged with the ungodly amount of matter. More poop water would continue to cover the floors as I plunged for my life. It was the final boss of all overflowing toilets, but I wasn't about to lose, for I had come this far. The stench grew stronger, and I winced as I used every bone in my body to stay sane. Thankfully, it somehow stayed contained to the one stall, and after many rigorous pumps, it was a miracle. The John finally sucked all the poop down, leaving me in relief, and 5 rags to be thrown to the trash. A sweat droplet trickled down my face. Or was that poop water? In my panic, I seriously considered quitting my job and walking out that same day. This happened about 15 years ago, where my friends and I went walking in the woods in West Michigan during early spring, where there weren't any leaves on the trees, and the ground was pretty matted down after the winter. We were having fun on shrooms and taking a long walk when I spotted a small sealed jar, so I picked it up, and there was something inside. I got excited because it looked really old and seemed like someone either lost it or wanted someone to find a time capsule or something cool. Anyway, I opened it up, and it was poop. That was the highlight of my day. Let me take you back a few years. I was hungover as hell the morning after my buddy's bachelor party camping trip, and I felt the night before beers and pork rumbling. I took off down the path with a shovel and my mountain money. An incredible view paid out before me. The coast of Big Sur, the mountains, the blue sky above, and I found a clearing free from view of the campsite. The ground was covered with gopher mounds and was quite soft. I dug a small hole, fairly deep, and took my pants down to my ankles. Oh man, the rumbling was getting more frequent and louder. I sunk into a deep squat over the hole, keeping my balance by supporting myself on the shovel handle, when a rustling noise behind me gave me notice. I turn around and see a rattlesnake 18 inches from my butthole. My blood ran cold. This thing had the body the size of a Coke can, and I was 2 to 3 hours away from a hospital. My body sucked up my impending release, and I spun rapidly, trying to bring my pants up and clutch the shovel in a striking position at the same time. We held eye contact as I slowly backed away. Hell, I'm too hungover for this. The snake pops down into one of the holes that I assumed were gopher holes. I hope to God those weren't all rattlesnake holes, but that's all I can imagine. I'm not about to play a deadly game of whack-a-mole with a field full of rattlesnakes. I took off at a 45-degree angle to the last position of the snake, and at the time that seemed strategic. Pale white and out of breath, I made it back to camp, and I had to tell my friends I almost just crapped on a rattlesnake. I still had to go when I finally gathered enough courage to try again, and I chose a spot about 15 feet from camp. I have resided in Japan for almost 5 years, and as you can imagine, have pooped many times in many different locations over the years. The benefit of bathrooms here is that they have much more privacy than one would expect in the West. Typically, a Western bathroom would have the bare minimum for privacy. There's usually a 1-foot gap along the top and bottom of the stall, and a 1-inch gap on either side of the small door. For many Japanese people who have traveled abroad, this has been a huge source of culture shock, and I can't say that I blame them. In my personal experience, there have been numerous occasions where people partook in finger-painting all over the stall with either menstrual blood or poop all over the stall. Having previously cleaned many bathrooms in my 10+ years working in retail before I came to Japan, and I can attest that the women's bathrooms are always worse than the men's. However, in Japan, this has been extremely rare in my experience. Not only is Japan overall cleaner, and there is far less litter in public places despite the lack of garbage cans. As a side note, the garbage cans were eliminated as a safety measure following the 1995 sarin gas attack on the Tokyo subway system. The cleanliness extends to the bathrooms. All bathrooms have full privacy with a stall door that covers from top to bottom with no gaps. Most are equipped with Western-style toilets that come with a washlet. Washlets are a godsend because the toilet seats are heated, and this is especially nice in the winter. There are controls to wash your butt, and there's also a flushing sound for added privacy while you do your business. I did notice, though, that most train station bathrooms don't provide washlets or privacy buttons. Depending on where you go, the availability of these Western-style toilets varies. Some train station bathrooms are equipped with mostly squat toilets, and only one Western. Other older buildings may only have squat toilets. It goes without saying that these squat toilets don't come with a washlet or privacy button. What sucks about these toilets is that you have to be able to aim well. For me, it was a bit of a learning curve, and my pee didn't always make it to the toilet. I did, however, use liberal amounts of toilet paper to do my best to clean up after my mess, trying to be a good human and all of that. My workplace has a location in an older building that has a squat toilet. For the most part, the building has traditional sliding doors, so of course you can hear everything no matter where you are located in the small building. One day, I was sent to work early to prepare for my English lesson as usual. Next door to me, another teacher was setting up an upper elementary school class. Then, I felt a huge dump coming that I couldn't ignore. I went to the bathroom. I swear to God, with every single push that I made to poop, It was accompanied with a trombone-like fart that was beautifully highlighted by the echo chamber beneath my butt. I eventually finished my business and slinked back to work. Nobody in the class said anything, but I guarantee they heard everything. I told my supervisor about the latter, and she said to me, "It can't be helped." This was not the first time this happened to me, where my dumps were audible enough for other people to hear. There was one more story, from maybe about 6 to 8 months ago. It was another occasion when I desperately needed to go to the bathroom at a train station during my commute home from work. When I got to the ladies' bathroom, I about gagged upon myself at the sight of an orangey soupy mixture in one of the largest sinks that was presented before me. I swear that someone must have chundered their entire week's worth of meals with how much of the substance was in the sink. This happened when I was 11 or 12. I grew up in a fairly rural area. Our immediate neighborhood had a regular block of houses, one next to the other, and the entire area was surrounded by almond orchards. Like most kids, we would wander around the neighborhood hanging out and doing whatever. I lived at the very end of our road, where the country road stopped and turned to dirt. The nearest neighbors who had kids in our age group lived a couple of 100 yards across one of the almond orchards. Their son and I, Nathan, would mess around just down the street near both our houses. But one day, while some of our neighbors were on vacation, we decided to climb the wooden fence at the back corner of their backyard, where the fence met the detached garage. Anyway, we climbed this fence and were just standing around looking at the garage and the nearby storage shed. We were about to climb back over the fence and go elsewhere when suddenly I felt a debilitating cramp that forced me to bend over. I said to Nathan, "Hey, wait a minute." My face was contorted with pain. He looked at me and asked, "What's wrong?" At this point, I knew exactly what was wrong. I immediately began scanning the ground somewhere with weeds for a bit of old newspaper, and then I began to unbutton my pants. And in an excited and heightened voice, Nathan said, "What are you doing? Are you going to poop?" I said nothing, and at this point had my pants down and my arse was out. His eyes had widened, his jaw was slack, and he stared on in disbelief. I could feel everything building up, so I tensed up, squeezed, closed my eyes, and shoved with all my might. To my surprise, due to the large volume of gas that it had built up, a 6-foot arc of poop steamed with great force towards the corner of the garage where our friends' bicycles were leant against the wall. Like a finger being randomly drawn across a piece of paper, the brown steam splattered across various parts of the two bicycles. Nathan exclaimed, "Ugh," in disgust. "That's gross, dude. You have a pressure ass." The stream lasted about 3 or 4 seconds, after which I used the newsprint to do the paperwork. I was laughing so hard at this point, I had tears going down my face, and Nathan just kept on telling me how I was disgusting. Here's the fun part. About 2 weeks later, having forgotten about our fecal adventure, we had ridden our bicycles to our friend Patrick's house to see if he wanted to come with us. Now, if you've ever seen the old 1960s TV show called The Munsters, Patrick looked like the kid named Eddie Munster, except with a high, almost shrill voice. He said that he indeed wanted to go with us, so he ran to get his bicycle, but about 20 seconds later ran back into the house and in his shrill Eddie Munster voice said to his mother, "Mum, someone crapped on our bikes." Yes, these were the neighbors whose backyards we had violated. I immediately felt a cold streak of fear and embarrassment rushed up and down my body, and said that we would be out in the street whenever he was ready. We then got the hell out of there. Nathan said, "See, dumbass, I told you shouldn't have done that," but I just began laughing again. Years later, I told Patrick that it was me who had crapped on his bicycle. He just called me a prick and started to laugh. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for joining me on tonight's installment of Poop Stories. They are always quite fun to do. If you did enjoy this story, feel free to let me know down below. Don't forget that subscribing and pressing the bell icon are not just meaningless words that I say, but things that you should do with your fingers and or mouses and pointers and stuff. So go ahead and do that now, because you want to know when I post. Speaking of which, tomorrow is the collaboration with Let's Read, so you really want to know when I post. So go ahead, subscribe and stuff. If you have any poop stories or just scary stories you want to share with me, you can send them to my email or post them on my Reddit. But email is just best for poop. Just email them to me. I do enjoy reading them. A fair amount of these were actually subscriber submitted. So, thank you to all those brave subscribers who shared some of their more intimate moments, should I say. They are hilarious poop stories, but to the people who have to clean them up, it is certainly horrifying. I think I've read in previous comments that they'd rather encounter cryptids than have to clean up other people's mess, and I don't blame them. But anyway, as always, a huge thank you to my amazing members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. You guys are amazing, beyond amazing, and I love you all so much. Thank you for continuing to help me keep everything ticking over here at Mortis Media. But that's it for now. I'll see you tomorrow for the collaboration with Let's Read. Don't be late. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.